This manual contains all the information necessary to achieve the best results with your visualization software. Looking into the distance relaxes the eyes. I focus on a certain point on my empty desktop. Even better, I render the distance, the ocean. You only become consciously aware of the sea in its absence, a way out of the limitations of the screen. It is necessary to imagine a space. There is no such thing as no space. There can only ever be no objects within a space. The sea once, prior to memory except for that of the stones, filled the basin that this city lies within. I read, the very first thing we need for a scene is some terrain. From the top, it's just a square piece of land that you've gotten. There's nothing really there to see, so we might want to bring in a material. From the material library, I pick troubled water. The sea is a place to go where you can escape the disappointment of the mainland. Restlessness combines both corporate spirit and frustration. In an extremely nondescript terrain, you are more frequently mistaken in figuring out your position. To orient yourself literally means to determine 4 points at any given place in the world, or, in other words, to know the way out. I try to get closer to the landscape. Maybe it would help to print it out. Approaching something always carries with it a sense of recognition and a constant feeling of loss. There is something about this flatness that is calming. No elevations and no rifts either. Tip: to accentuate your surfaces, use point light, spotlight, or directional light. In a standard terrain, the LOD, level of detail, is not very high. Zooming in makes the sea look like a transparent film. It is impossible to dive into the surface of a standard terrain. The only option you have is to zoom in, a second best solution. Just like in the 70s cartoons, thin transparent sheets and fans are used to create a real-time simulation of the sea. It's a good feeling to be involved in a reality that I am able to change. A reality that constantly promises me I can be like this or even totally different. Note, multiple undos are impossible here. I decide to switch from a standard terrain to procedural terrain. Here, interactivity is a requirement, an individual choice of materials, and the definition of perspective and wind condition. The software is asking me if I want to use a bump scale or a refraction index, whether I choose mixed material or an ecosystem, and how big the global reflectivity should be. A flood of decisions for me to make. Even the voice in the audio tutorial keeps repeating, "I think I want." She is just as swamped as I am. I read, there are 3 ways to generate wind. Place an omni-fan or directional fan in the landscape, or use the function editor. These will not be rendered in the project. Rendering is like being on a boat in the fog. It's hours and hours of computing. Particles that flow back and forth like the sea. Because there are no requirements for creating a landscape, the finished product is always okay. The only criterion is a short-term satisfaction of the desire to be elsewhere. Note, for creating a good composition, it is important to either mask the horizon or hide other objects behind it. I ignore this warning and look at the end of the horizon without any distractions. I can even see the curve of the globe. It's only later that I discover this is not possible in the program. According to my calculations, at eye level you can see about 4.47 kilometers into the open sea, which is about an hour's walk. Procedural terrains allow you to dive into the surface. They still not do allow you to glide directly on the water. You can only be above or below it. Sea level remains inaccessible and just as abstract as the zero. It is impossible to swim here. Tip: ground moving makes the sea look deeper. Note: referencing underwater points of orientation enables you to determine if you are still on course. In order to calculate the course correction value back to the starting point, one should use the triangular navigation formula of 3 times 120 degrees. It is important to maintain visual contact while diving in. Orientation is only partly learnable. The goal is to create meaning through meaningless action. When you are very into a task, you enter a flow. It is focusing the attention on one specific field, forgetting any problems, losing track of time and the sense of self, feeling in control of the situation. Being immersed in this way makes one stop wondering if these actions are productive or if they will be rewarded in any way. Engaging in an operation that doesn't lead anywhere. Perhaps that is what the rapture of the deep is about. Note, the POI or point of interest is the subject or central point of the scene. The POI is the main focus of the view. Looking out the window, are those wispy afternoon too, or low grey clouds? One is in the water just as water is in the water, but yet still outside it, far from what is self, which doesn't exist. The tutorial says, one thing I want to say, don't be afraid to experiment. You have already spent your money on the software, and if you really mess up, the only thing you are gonna lose is time. You won't lose any material. Anyway, that's the nice thing about working in computer programs. Water is not equally distributed. Instead, it is concentrated at a certain point. This matter has only been formed based on its own asymmetries. That means, if our world was mathematically perfect and proper, I wouldn't exist. A design in a plural sense. I am a multitude of others. The scene which has changed in the meantime calls for a course correction that goes beyond the common circular dimension. For example, at 451 degrees on Fahrenheit scale. A temperature where paper catches fire. Screens start to burn later.